On my 62nd birthday, I sat alone at a table for 4. I had made a reservation. I had bought a new dress. I had called each of my 3 children the week before to remind them. My son texted at 6:15. "Sorry, Mom, something came up." My older daughter never responded at all. My younger daughter sent a gift card, $25, to a restaurant I had never heard of. I ate my birthday dinner alone. Salmon, a glass of white wine, bread I didn't finish. The waiter asked if I was waiting for someone. I told him no. What I did not tell him, what I did not tell anyone that night, was that the woman sitting alone at that table had a net worth of $1.4 million, and that not one of her children had any idea. My name is Patricia Okafor. I am 65 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, in a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood where the summers are brutal and the winters are kind and the sunsets turn the sky colors that still make me stop whatever I am doing and look. I have lived here for 22 years. I know every crack in my driveway and every neighbor's dog by name. This house is paid for. Everything I own is paid for. I was not born into wealth. I want to make that clear from the beginning, because the story I am about to tell you is not the story of a woman who inherited money or married money or stumbled into money. It is the story of a woman who made a decision at 43 years old, after the worst year of her life, to build something that could never be taken away from her. It took 19 years. It required more discipline than I knew I had, and it happened almost entirely in secret. Let me tell you how I got there. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, the daughter of a postal worker and a school cafeteria manager. We were not poor, but we were careful. My parents counted every dollar without making us feel the counting. My mother kept a small notebook in the kitchen drawer where she wrote down every expense: groceries, utilities, school supplies, the occasional treat. I watched her do this my entire childhood, without fully understanding what I was watching. I understand it now. I studied accounting at the University of Memphis, graduated in 1981, and spent the next decade working my way through a series of increasingly responsible positions at financial firms in Memphis and later Atlanta. In 1989, I married a man named Charles Okafor, a Nigerian-American engineer who was brilliant and charming and who I believed, completely and without reservation, was my partner in every sense of the word. We had 3 children: Dominic, born in 1991, Renee, born in 1993, and Simone, born in 1996. I loved being their mother with a fierceness that surprised even me. I had not expected to feel so completely rearranged by parenthood. I had not expected to love anything the way I loved those 3 children. I also had not expected my marriage to fall apart the way it did. Charles and I separated in 2002 and finalized our divorce in 2003. It was not dramatic. There was no affair, no explosion, no single moment of rupture. It was quieter than that, and in some ways harder. We had simply grown into different people who wanted different things, and by the time we admitted it to each other, we had already been living like polite strangers for 3 years. The divorce was civil. We shared custody. Charles was, and remains, a decent father. What the divorce left me with was a significantly reduced household income, 3 children between the ages of 6 and 11, a house with a mortgage I could barely manage alone, and a clarity about my financial situation that felt like cold water in the face. I was 41 years old. I had a good job. I was a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Atlanta by then. But divorce is expensive and children are expensive, and the gap between what I earned and what I needed was uncomfortably narrow. For 2 years after the divorce, I managed. I kept the children in their schools, kept the house, kept everything as stable as I could on the outside, while quietly terrified on the inside. And then, in 2004, my mother died. She left me $11,000. It was everything she had managed to save over a lifetime of careful notebook keeping and counted dollars. She left it to me with a note in her handwriting that said simply, "Patricia, don't spend this. Make it work for you the way I never could. Love, Mama." I sat with that note for a long time. And then I made a decision that changed everything. I did not spend the $11,000. I invested it, carefully, conservatively, with the same methodical attention to detail I brought to my accounting work. I opened a brokerage account, read every book about index investing I could find, and began learning, in earnest, about building wealth over time. I was 43 years old. I had 3 children to raise and a mortgage to pay, and not much left over at the end of each month. But I committed to investing something, even when something was very small, every single month without exception. I also made a second decision. I told no one. Not my children. Not my friends. Not my colleagues. Not Charles. Not anyone. Partly this was practical. I did not want anyone to know I had money when I didn't have much, and I didn't want financial decisions made by committee. But partly it was something older and more instinctive than practicality. My mother had kept her notebook in a kitchen drawer, not on the counter. She had managed the family finances quietly and without fanfare. There was wisdom in that privacy, I thought. There was safety in it. I kept that safety for 19 years. The children grew up. Dominic graduated from Georgia Tech and became a software engineer in Seattle. Renee went to law school. I helped with tuition, quietly, telling her it was a loan from a small savings account, and became a corporate attorney in Chicago. Simone, my youngest, studied graphic design and moved to Los Angeles, where she worked for a branding agency and lived in an apartment I helped her secure by co-signing the lease. I helped all 3 of them, consistently and without announcement, throughout their adult lives. A down payment on Dominic's first car. Tuition assistance for Renee. The co-sign for Simone. Smaller things too, unexpected bills, emergency expenses, the kind of help that a parent provides when they can, and that a child receives without always fully registering what it costs the person giving it. I don't say this to keep score. I say it because it is relevant to what came next. Around 2018, when Dominic was 27, Renee was 25, and Simone was 22, something shifted. I noticed it gradually, the way you notice a tide going out. The calls became less frequent. The visits at holidays became shorter, then optional, then occasionally non-existent. Dominic was busy in Seattle. Renee had her career and a serious relationship in Chicago. Simone had her life in Los Angeles. They were adults. I understood that. I had raised them to be independent. But there is a difference between independence and absence. By 2021, I was talking to each of my children, maybe once a month. Dominic called on my birthday and Mother's Day with reliability, but not warmth. The calls felt like obligations being discharged. Renee texted more than she called, and her texts were newsy and pleasant but shallow, the kind of communication that conveys information without connection. Simone was the most affectionate of the 3, but also the most inconsistent. She could call 3 times in a week, and then go 6 weeks without a word. None of them asked how I was doing. I mean that precisely. They asked how are you the way people ask about the weather, as a greeting, not a question. My 62nd birthday was in October of 2022. I had made a reservation at a restaurant I had been wanting to try for months. I had called each of the children the week before, not to demand their presence, just to mention it, to give them the opportunity. Dominic texted at 6:15 with apologies. Renee never responded. Simone sent the gift card. I ate alone. The salmon was good. The wine was cold. The waiter was kind. I drove home and sat in my living room in my new dress, and I did something I had not done in a very long time. I cried. Not from self-pity. I am not a self-pitying woman. I cried from something closer to grief. Grief for the family I had imagined when those 3 children were small, and the world was full of possibility, and I believed, with everything in me, that love freely given eventually finds its way back. The next morning, I called my financial advisor. My portfolio, at that point, had grown to just over $1.2 million. Between the investment account, my retirement funds, and the equity in my paid-off home, my net worth was approximately $1.4 million. I had been building it quietly for 19 years, through market downturns and a divorce and 3 children's worth of expenses, and a pandemic, and everything else life had managed to put in the way. I told my advisor I wanted to update my estate planning documents. Then I called an estate attorney. What I did over the next several months was not done in anger. I want to be clear about that. I did not rewrite my will to punish my children. I rewrote it to reflect reality, the reality of who had shown up and who hadn't, who had maintained a relationship with me and who had treated that relationship as optional. I established a charitable trust. 40% of my estate, approximately $560,000 at current valuation, would go to 3 organizations: a literacy nonprofit in Memphis that had mattered to my mother, a scholarship fund at the University of Memphis for first-generation accounting students, and a community foundation in Phoenix that supported elderly residents living alone. The remaining 60% was restructured. Dominic and Renee's shares were reduced and made conditional, not eliminated, but tied to specific terms that my attorney helped me articulate carefully and legally. Simone, who had been the most present of the 3 despite her inconsistency, received a somewhat larger, unconditional share. I also did one more thing. I wrote each of my children a letter. Not to inform them of the changes, the will would speak for itself in time, but to tell them the truth about how I had felt on that birthday. About the years of quiet absence. About what it had meant to sit at a table for 4 alone, in a new dress, on the evening of my 62nd birthday. I wrote it plainly and without accusation. I stated facts. I described feelings. I told them I loved them. And I told them that love, in my experience, requires showing up. I mailed the letters on a Tuesday. Renee called me Thursday evening. She was crying before I finished saying hello. She said she had read my letter 4 times. She said she didn't know, and I believe her. I genuinely believe she didn't know how far she had drifted. She said she was sorry. We talked for 2 hours, the longest conversation we had had in years, and somewhere in the middle of it she stopped crying and started listening, really listening. And I remembered why I had always believed she would be extraordinary. Dominic called Friday morning. His call was harder. He was defensive at first. He talked about his schedule, his workload, the difficulty of cross-country relationships. I let him talk. When he finished, I said, quietly, "Dominic, I'm not asking you to explain. I'm asking you to show up." There was a long silence. Then he said, "Okay, Mom." "Okay." Simone flew to Phoenix 3 weeks later. She arrived on a Friday evening with flowers from the airport gift shop that were slightly wilted and completely perfect. We sat on my back patio until midnight talking about everything: her work, her life in Los Angeles, things she had never told me because she hadn't thought I wanted to hear them. I hadn't known she thought that. I told her I wanted to hear everything. It was the best conversation I had had in years. Now, you may be wondering when my children found out about the money. And I will tell you. It came out gradually, over the following months, not in a single dramatic revelation, but in the way truths tend to emerge in families when people start actually talking to each other. Renee, who is an attorney, began asking questions about my retirement planning, genuinely, out of care, wanting to make sure I was secure. I answered her honestly. The number surprised her. I watched her face process it. She said, "Mom, why didn't you ever tell us?" I said, "Because it wasn't relevant until now." She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "Were you testing us?" I said, "No. I was protecting myself." There's a difference. I don't know if she fully understood that distinction in the moment, but I believe she is beginning to. Dominic found out when he came to visit in the spring, his first visit to Phoenix in 4 years. We went to dinner, and over the course of the evening I told him about the investment account, about my mother's $11,000, about 19 years of quiet building. He was quiet for a long time afterward. Then he said something that surprised me. He said, "Mom, I think I've been taking you for granted my whole life. And I think I've been doing it because you made everything look easy." That was the most honest thing Dominic had said to me in a decade. I told him so. Simone already knew, in the way that Simone knows things intuitively without being told. When I confirmed the number, she just nodded and said, "I figured you had something put away. You always seemed too calm." I laughed at that. I laughed until my eyes watered. That is not the end of the story. Families are not problems that get solved. They are relationships that get tended or don't. My children and I are tending ours now. It is imperfect. Dominic and I still have moments of friction. Renee still sometimes defaults to texts when a call would mean more. Simone still goes quiet for weeks at a time and then reappears with flowers from airport gift shops. But they show up. More than they did. In ways that are still becoming. I have not changed my will back to what it was before. The charitable trust stands. The conditional terms stand. Not as punishment, as honesty. As a reflection of the world as it actually is rather than the world as I once hoped it would be. I am 65 years old. I have $1.4 million and a paid-off house in Phoenix and a back patio where the sunsets are extraordinary. I have 3 children who are learning, at various speeds and with varying degrees of grace, what it means to have a mother who will not be invisible. I have my mother's $11,000 to thank for all of it. And a little notebook in my kitchen drawer where I write down every expense. Just like she taught me. If Patricia's story moved you, if you have ever loved someone completely and been made to feel invisible by that love, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have a story of your own, of starting over, of building quietly, of refusing to be forgotten, send it to us. We read every single one. Real stories. Real strength. Real justice.